All right, time to get down to the Mr. Glow podcast, Chapter 3 of the Road to the Undisputed Minimumweight Championship, the WBO. Last time, guys, we talked about the second half of the WBC belt after doing the lineal weight belt in Chapter 2. And even though I whizzed by those as much as I can, the later champions at the time during the 2010s were somewhat interesting in their own rights, even if they weren't remembered as Ricardo Lopez. Like Moonstry had a great undefeated 54-0 record with 12 title defenses at the time from 2014 to 2020. He lost against another Thailand fighter at his time, and that guy defeated him twice. We had a Japanese fighter, Shigeoka. He later lost twice against Melvin Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, we're going to get to him sooner than later into this end of this episode. We did have a two-time champion of Ego Den Jonaplan, another great fighter, stepping out of the country of, you guessed it, Thailand. But we've been having other fighters all from Mexico, just like Isaac Bustos. And and also another fighter actually in Russia that was born at the time that became champion back during the 2007. And we had a great storyline moment by another fighter at the time. But technically, guys, with all that being said, the WBO belt is actually another step up to the division. But quite frankly, guys, the WBO belt was not on the line as much as you would say back in the old days of boxing. Now, guys, I've said this a lot, and I'm going to keep saying this probably until the end of my 100th episode podcast, which might come in September. Keep this in mind while I'm trying to get my mouse connected here so I can have fun with my mouse. And here we go. Perfect. It's now working. So technically, guys, the WBO belt of the minimum weight champion, as said before, was made back in 1988 in Puerto Rico, which does explain another champion, as of right now, is champion, has been on the high alert for a lot of champions back in the day. And technically, when it came to some champions, the Ring Magazine belt wasn't really at the hype yet. But neither was mostly the minimum weight. Now, guys, I've said this in the last episode. We have the mini flyweight, or as they would call it, the paperweight, minimum weight, straw weight, super autumn weight. But they do call it mini flyweight, but in BoxRec, they call it minimum weight, so that's what I'm going to call it. Keep that in mind. It's interesting. Now, guys, the WBO would organize their first championship back in August of 1999 by a fighter that had an undefeated 9-0 record. That guy was none other than Rafael Torres from the country of the Dominican Republic. So this guy was in his mid-20s. He went on to start off small, and from the start of March of 1986, he built up a couple wins there, built up one other win, a full year off hiatus in 87, and then decided to have a record of mostly 5 professional fights. He was the Dominican flyweight title, but before you know it, he dropped down some weight to go to the minimum weight. And around the time, guys, as said before, because the WBC belt was organized in October of 87, but the IBF was the first one to do it in June of 87, as I did talk about that before, but I'll talk about that tomorrow as this video is uploaded. So with the WBA, that was already sanctioned in January of 88 by the minimum weight, meaning that it was already now a fully weight class at the time. it took another year and a half until August of 89 when the WBO came. Now, the WBO belt was still a minor weight division until 2007. And surprisingly, guys, the WBO belt did not generate a lot of buzz for what it was. Buzz for what it was. And to be honest, guys, this was actually the slow remarks of what the championship was. And I will say this, though, guys. It started off just short. So, undefeated Rafael Torres won a 12-round decision in his country against an also Colombian fighter with a record of 8 wins, undefeated, with the guy's resume being worse than Jake Paul, because from January the 22nd, 1988 to May the 5th, 89, the guy had 8 wins against bad opposition. Yeah, this guy that goes by the name of Yamil Caraballo from Colombia had a record of 8 wins and only 1 knockout. And even though he was the Colombian minimum weight champion in his 6th fight against a guy that only had a record of 2 wins and 13 losses, and other fights were even worse. His last win was a 12-10 record, and that was up in the flyweight. And then he went back down to minimum weight a few months later to fight against Rafael Torres in his backyard of Dominican Republic. And Rafael won by 12 rounds. This guy became the Jake Paul of Colombia in boxing. And sadly, fun fact, I did remember this. Yamil Caraballo also fought for the WBC belt in December of 94 against Ricardo Lopez. And the guy retired a year later with his last 3 fights being 0-6, 0-3, and 12-2-2 for the Colombian light flyweight champion. Yeah, 2 title shots with 16 wins, 7 knockouts, 5 of his losses by 3 knockouts, and a draw. Yeah, nothing much for a record for that guy, and he was already a failure before he even had his first title shot. And Rafael Torres, well, the next year on July the 31st, 11 months later in 1990, he squeaks out a split decision against his country. A guy that would go on closely to earn a shot, as out of nowhere, Rafael Torres, for some reason, takes on a guy named Husni Ray, a guy from the country of Indonesia. And the guy's record was nothing much special. Said it before and said it again. The guy was somewhat of an Indonesian obsolete KTI, ATI, KTPI minimum weight champion, which is a random belt back in the day or something. Interesting. Which the guy had a bunch of wins and retained the title against fighters that were in their debut or only had 1 fight and no wins. Yeah. And he lost split decision against Torres. Considering Rafael Torres went to Indonesia to fight against him, which is actually huge respect. So technically, it wasn't bad. Unfortunately, by this time, the guy took a hiatus off in boxing, and for reasons why we don't know, because for the next few years, the belt would somehow almost disappear for some random reason. Because in 1993, any year at the time, he retired the belt. So what was he doing around that time? Well, in 1992, he took himself 2 full years off. He fought against a 20-3 fighter, barely won, only to go to America and Jai Alai Fronton, Miami, Florida, against Jesus Rajas and lost even when he was knocked out in round 7, but survived a 10-round fight. He took on Chana Porpayan, a 29-0 fighter from Taiwan, which the guy would actually later fight for some titles at the time around the weight class in the 2000s. And he also fight for a title in 1995, which would later be his downfall until then. But we'll talk about his career in just a moment. Unfortunately, Rafael Torres lost against Rocky Lin, a guy that went back 2 fights from winning after his Ricardo Lopez fight recently. And it went on, and it's weird because back around 93, it was like he was off hiatuses at the time, but his career was, everything else from his career just became not good. So he went on to achieve nothing until May the 15th, 1993. Paul Weir from the UK, a guy that actually had a record of not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 professional wins from April of 1992 to March of 1993. He had 5 professional wins, which also became the Jake Paul of British boxing. And his resume record was fighters of 2-4, 1-4, 6-11-2, 1-6-1, and 3-11-3. And some of those fights were close by judges scoring it just barely in his favor, with a couple knockout wins and decisions, and 3 wins. And his 6th professional fight was for the vacant title against a longtime journeyman of 35 6-2 fighter Fernando Martinez. And I have heard of Fernando Martinez before, as from Mexico. The guy did had some interesting hype at the time. I have heard about him with the Alex Sanchez fight in 1995. But considering that was his past prime career at the time, but that's all I know about him. Unfortunately, he did fight for his first title until he lost against Jose D. Jesus back in 89 for the WBO light flyweight champion. And, well, some years later, losing out a couple more fights and so on, he gets another shot and loses by somehow he had some of the judges giving him barely around after 6 rounds, making it even. And the 6-0 fighter of Paul Weir got his 6th victory by retaining the belt. And it was amazing. 6 professional fights, and Paul Weir from the UK just became the next Jake Paul. It's funny. And then in October of 93, he fights against Lindy Memani, a 15-5-3 fighter. Nothing much of a fighter, but the guy went the distance of 12 rounds, only to fight against in February the 2nd of 94 against Josu Camacho, a 14-2 fighter from Puerto Rico. And this guy pulled out an upset victory in Glasgow, Scotland in a 12-round fight to win the WBO World Light Flyweight Championship. The World Light Flyweight Championship? Wait, I thought it was the minimum weight belt. Well, unfortunately, guys, after he defended his belt in October, a couple months later, on December the 16th, 1993, Paul Weir would vacate the title to move up to challenge for the light flyweight champion. So, yeah, there we go. Two fighters that fought for titles and vacate the belt. I hate it. They vacate the belt, and I'm like, what the frig? So what happened? Well, days later, Alex Sanchez defeated Orlando Malone to become the new minimum weight champion in the first round by knockout. And you think it's a fluke. Was it a fluke knockout win? Unfortunately, the guy only had 9 wins and 1 loss, and the guy's career of Orlando would later have his record reduced to a 10 wins and 22 knockouts, 22 losses in his career. And he already lost against a good fighter a few months ago named Danny Romero Jr., a great undefeated fighter. So what happened to Alex Sanchez? Well, he didn't vacate the title. because he would actually later in January the 7th, a month later after the fight, he would take on against a debut fighter that goes by the name of Arturo Mayon in his debut. He took on a debut fighter fighting for the first time. He a guy from Mexico, and both of these guys are fighting in the country of Spain. He's fighting against a guy in his debut. And also on BoxRec, it says right here that Arturo Mayon had no known professional experience, which made us wonder, was he the late replacement for a guy that did not show up to fight, and he was just brought in as just a, hey, we'll pay you, just get your butt in there? I guess, because the guy never had zero professional fights. He had no rights for a world title. So why was this on the line? Why was this for the WBO World Minimum Weight title? It made no sense, and the fight went 1 minute and 30 seconds, about another minute and 19 seconds faster than the 2 minute and 49 second first round knockout he had last month ago. 1 minute and 30 seconds, and he knocks out the debut fighter. By 1994, he takes on a non-title fight of the 2-5 fighter, then fights against Carlos Juan Rodriguez and goes first round KO against that guy, considering the guy's record was 8-5. He fights against a 9-11 guy, Oscar Andrade, in September, the next month in September, and said it was a fourth round TKO, and yeah, not a good resume. This guy was taking on nobodies. Jesus. And you know what's crazy? He took on Pablo Tiznado. And this guy actually did have an interesting resume of some fights in his career, even though his first years of pro, he lost his first fight in his second professional fighter against someone good. But he did have some interesting fights in 1991 that brought some wins, lost out some fights here or there, but he did continue to try to fight hard. But for some reason, they didn't give him a title shot, which makes sense because the guy lost a bunch of fights, but still, yet again, this guy, I just guess that makes sense why there's not a lot of great competition, to be honest, because later in January, he would take on a 19-10-1 fighter named Rafael Orzolsko. And that guy got knocked out in the first round and in the 12th round, and survived with scorecards of 116-110, 116-111, and 115-111. And the dumbest is about to come, because that was the start of 1995. In February, May, and June, he had 3 pro fights against 0-3, 36-9-2, and a pro debut fighter. And they all ended by second round TKO, first round KO, and third round TKO. And then in July the 29th, he takes on Thomas Rivera, a 12-0-2 fighter for the WBO belt, which was far better than any other belt out there. And surprisingly, the guy went 12 rounds the distance, and considering a couple judges had it close for him, but it was a wide unanimous decision for him, and Alex won. And then by October, he takes on another nobody for a non-title. And then in May of 96, he gets a non-title fight again. And then he goes for another non-title fight in February, still holding on to the title against Edgar Cardenas. And the guy pulled out an upset victory by winning against Alex Sanchez in a non-title fight. A non-title fight. For reasons why they didn't rematch the fight again or something like that, because this made Alex Sanchez a laughing stock, because a month later he takes on Jose Victor Burgos, and surprisingly he gets a 12-round fight, barely squeaking out the judges giving him favored after having knockout scores and a little bit of a first-round controversy with some penalty point abductions around the time. And considering, and then of course Alex did score out another knockout in round 11, which did help him, but yet again he was not at his game plan after that loss. And it's even worse because later in August of 1997 he fought against Ricardo Lopez, and we've already talked about that before. He scored out a second round knockout, went back 3 rounds for Lopez beating his butt by another round knockout, and the fight was over. And Alex Sanchez's career, well, he went up to light flyweight and he lost out a fight against Jose Victor Burgos in a rematch for their second meeting, which ended in a draw. But this time they did it again in 2003, and there were some hiatuses into them, but their third match ended with a IBF World Light Flyweight title by a round 12 TKO victory for Jose, winning. Yeah. And then he went back to minimum weight for the WBO belt, which we'll get to that sooner enough. And then he had a couple more fights in 2005 for WBO World Light Flyweight titles, and he lost all of them. So, yeah, Alex Sanchez did not get a lot of fun stuff going around his favor. And sadly, it's even worse because after winning the title, as Lopez did, he then vacated the belt that same month after he stated that he would give the championship belt to his father. The WBO president at the time deemed it as a public resignation. So at this moment, guys, Vacant has become WBO minimum weight champion 3 times. And it's only going to get worse. In December of 1997, Eric Jamili defeats Mickey Cantel in the UK by a round 8 knockout victory to seal the deal. From the Philippines, Mickey Cantel from the UK was going to bring out a victory for the crowd, only to suffer a loss in the 8th round, considering that the judges were keeping the competition close by far. And considering Mark Nelson was a referee that day, didn't work out. Because this guy that had a horrific record, like seriously, this guy had 10 wins, 5 losses, and a draw, and Mickey had 13-4-1. And Eric Jamil was only 20 years old, of a southpaw fighter, which even makes this moment crazy. He goes out to win out the title. Only later in May the 30th, he lost against Kerman Guardia, a Colombian fighter. Well, hey, at least he didn't vacate the title. But speaking about vacating it, it's going to get worse. Because later, by 1998, with all that being said, later in March of 1999, they would have a rematch against each other. After a round 5 cornerman retirement in the Las Vegas Hilton Hotel, where Kerman won, considering where they stated that referee Jay Nady stopped the bout after with the advised physician that stopped the fight because of Eric's injuries, they thought it was a little bit cheeky. So they gave him a chance. They went back and, well, the fight went 12 rounds by decision. And surprisingly, because that fight was a lot more shocking than it was in the first, because Eric Jamili came out of nowhere, scored a knockout in round 4, and brought down round 9 for another win against Guardia. And surprisingly, it wasn't enough to reduce the point standings, because even after Eric scored out points in that round, considering who you ask, because a lot of the rounds were completely a little bit dominated by Guardia in the fight. And yeah, it's almost like how Vladimir Klitschko got knocked out 3 times in one fight against Samuel Peter, and he won all by 3 scorecards of 114 and 111. So considering how it was a good fight from that, Guardia still had enough to win it and retain the title later in October against Luis Alberto Lazarte, a 18-1 fighter from, of course, Argentina, which was another interesting fight that went to split decision, considering 2 of the judges had 118-110 for Guardia and 114-115 for Luis. We went in then, but then suddenly the guy took a long time hiatus off to never go back to the ring again until April the 6th, 2001 against Juan Alfonso Kev Baz, a 25-4-1 fighter, which we have talked about before, a guy that was involved with the WBC belt back in 2003 and so on. But before that, in 2001, he would later fight against Kerman, and surprisingly, he got another great close victory there. And surprisingly, Kerman did what he did to survive the 12 rounds by 115-112 by two of the scores and 115-111 by another judge. And surprisingly, he did knock down Keb twice in round 9, which also brought the scores a little bit there to the close part of it, but I wouldn't say much about it, because the real truth came in when he actually decided to vacate the title to go up to the light flyweight in 2001 because of that. And then before you know it, on June the 29th, 2002, George Mata, a Spanish fighter, defeated Reynaldo Frutos, a known boxer, by becoming a world champion. On June the 29th, 2002, would be the championship belt of deciding the champion, where he would become world champion. Now, unfortunately, guys, he wasn't much of a champion at the time, as it said that he was given the belt because his first fight would be in November against Jairo Arango. Now, it said that George Mata did had an interim win back in June against Frutos, which the guy was from Panama. And surprisingly, after scoring this victory in November against Jairo Arango for a 12-round fight, he would fight against Eduardo Rey Martinez in March of 2003. And considering it was a close fight for him, it ended by a round 11 KO loss. The guy's undefeated record came to an end against a 17-5-1 fighter of a journeyman, and technically that was it. Eduardo would later fight a month later in May the 3rd, 5 or so weeks after that fight, against the one and only, you guessed it, Ivan Calderon. And guys, this Puerto Rican fighter was history. The guy went into boxing and he outboxed this guy like crazy. After he suffered an injury and due to other moments, as this Nicaraguan boxer that pulled out an upset victory a month ago, this 28-year-old 15-0 fighter from Puerto Rico went to the Mandalay Bay Resort and just dominated the fight. But sadly, by round 9, the fight was stopped due to a cut over the eye of Marquez, even when it was down in round 7 at 6, and the damage was done. And this is when Ivan made history as trying to become the next championship boxer. His title wins were different. He fought against Lorenzo Trejo in September by round 12 decision, a journeyman fighter. He had a fight with Alex Sanchez in December, the guy that was already this time losing fights at the time, but went 12 rounds. And then another 12 round, or we thought, until he took on Edgar Cardenas, a longtime journeyman, which we are now back to him again, and he gets his fight in March of 2004. And it ended with a round 11 KO victory. But unfortunately, even if Edgar won the fight, unfortunately, the title was on the line for Calderon because Cardenas failed to make weight. He was at 108 3/4 pounds, not even close from being under 105 pounds to be in the fight. So not much of a title defense there. But then in July, he fought against Roberto Carlos Leiva, got round 12 of decision by all 3 judges scoring it 116-112. And then all judges scored it a wide unanimous decision in November against Carlos Fajardo. And the MGM Grand. Also, speaking about Roberto Carlos Leyva, it said that Calderon was cut due to a head clash in round 1, and he got hurt in round 5. Considering the toe-to-toe action was close, it seemed like that was his tough fight, considering some of the competition wasn't much. But seeing him fight in the MGM Grand and having Carlos also deduct a point for low blowing him in round 11 in their fight, surprisingly, their next fights in April of 2005, June the 25th, and in December the 10th were longtime journeyman fighters and interesting competitors. His first fight was to Nakao, and he settled it with a round 8 TKO. Even when he brought his opponent down in the first round, it was decent. He also fought against a guy named Gerardo Verde Moreno and settled it with a 12-round decision in Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City, which was another fight where he dominated the fight early with the Mexican challenger that came hard during the fight and the second half of the fight, but he survived and went on to win. Daniel Reyes, his fight in December was complete, utter domination. Not a scratch. Until he fought against the later WBC Minimumweight Champion, Isaac Bustos. And that fight was utter domination. All judges, all from 120 to 108 or 119 to 109, doesn't matter. Ivan was killing it. He was dominating wins after wins. And this was back in February when he won that fight. Later in April, he had an 18-5 fighter named Miguel Tellez and got knocking him down in round 9. And then he had a win against Jose Luis Varela, a fighter with a 13-1 record in October that year in Colombia, and scored a dominated 12-round fight, only to get matched up with harder opponents. Now, Ronald Barrera wasn't much of a fighter that we don't know much about him, other than he went 12 rounds the decision by split decision against Ivan. On April the 28th, another close fight with all three judges scoring at 115 to 113. Ivan's 11th title defense was on fire. But unfortunately, after this title defense, he then vacated the title. And keep this in mind, guys, him vacating this title at that time was tough because April of 2007 was a time when the WBO finally became a major belt. And considering Ivan's title defenses weren't much to talk about, but yet again, it is the minimum weight, doesn't have a lot of competition, but he did something. He defended the belt like no one else did. Even if his competition wasn't that much, he did something. Because after vacating the title, he would go up to challenge Ramon Garcia for the WBO light flyweight title just around that time in April, 4 months later. And considering Hugo Fidel Cazares did brought Calderon down in the 8th round, it didn't stop Calderon to finish the 12-round fight to also win that belt by split decision. And went on to win other fights and more domination until 2010 when he lost twice against Giovanni Segura. But hey, who am I to know, to question this or that? The guy wouldn't make a lot of success there again, and after suffering an interesting close win against someone and then lose the WBO World Minimum Weight title a few more years later, Ivan was an interesting dude. He was interesting because at this time, guys, another fighter came into boxing. His name was Donnie Neitz. And Donnie Neitz had his best boxing fight ever in 2007. The guy did suffer a first loss in his career, and unfortunately, he went on to try to fight some fights in the first few years. After becoming the WBO Asia Pacific champion in 2006 and retained it a couple times, another guy from Thailand named Samporn Sita, I think we can already tell who that person is, was already trying to build his career up even by dominating his Pan-Asian Boxing Minimumweight Championship. And after dominating that belt for a bunch of years at the time, both of these two guys were meant to fight each other. This was the fight of the century, maybe the fight of the decade is what I meant to say. From the country of the Philippines, these two guys fought for gold. The WBO belt came into play against these two guys, and they were making history. And this was it. Donnie Neitz went into the fight, putting down Porcelon in the fourth round, and deducted a point in round 10 for a repeated low blow, if it wasn't bad enough. And considering with all footage and everything else, these guys put each other on the line. And with everything going on, this was a true testament. After 12 rounds of close competition, they came to a close decision. Donnie Neitz defeated the 20-0 undefeated fighter to become the WBO champion. And what did he do after that? Well, he defended the belt just a little bit more than just a couple more years left in himself, because he came back to the ring 11 months later in August the 30th against a random fighter named Eddie Castro. Eddie Castro, a 12-3-1 fighter that not much of a resume into himself, but he recovered round 1 but couldn't make it to round 2. And then in February, he fought against Eric Ramirez, which was far better of a fighter, but the guy got brought down in round 1, round 5, round 12, and round 9, and he couldn't get nothing done. Even though he was winning rounds and taking rounds away from Donnie by 116 to 108, 115 to 109, 113 to 111 after 12 rounds, surprisingly, those knockouts were already done for. Yeah, Eric Ramirez from Mexico just couldn't get nothing done. Even though if he was trying to win the rounds, you still have to try to not get your butt knocked down. But that's the way life goes, because before you know it, Manuel Vargas came in and did the unthinkable and almost got out a split decision win in September against Donnie. Donnie recovered and went on to fight for in the light flyweight in January for some random reason, and won by a final 10th round win. Knockout. And then he comes back to a couple more pounds back to the minimum weight to fight against someone named Mario Rodriguez, a 10-5-3 fighter that not much of a fighter, but there were some specialties of this guy other than this Mexican fighter had some stuff. But after losing his first few fights in his early career and such, and I just didn't really understand this, but he had fights, but yet again, the guy would do something interesting considering the guy's resume and his record for how bad it was stinked, but Mario Rodriguez would do something crazy in the future. In the minimum weight, considering that would be the only success he would get, but surprisingly, that won't be the last time we'll talk about him. Surprisingly, Mario would go 12 rounds the distance with our good old buddy Donnie. But Donnie, well, to be honest, he had the thing rolling. And we can talk about Jesus Sylvester, but to be honest, that 10-round random fight was just a waste. So, for some reason, he decided to vacate the belt. Why? Simple. He became the fourth person in history to ever vacate the WBO because Donnie wanted to move up to weight class again. So I think we can already tell, guys, that the light flyweight division is an underrated weight class, because when I look at the light flyweight, I see it being underrated. So I can understand that these boxers that were in the minimum weight at the time couldn't get nothing done because there wasn't a lot of great competition there. I'm not saying that the resumes are bad, considering it's not their fault. They just did what they tried to do to get stuff done. There's a reason why Ivan Calderon didn't want to remain undefeated in boxing like Ricardo Lopez. He had to go for it. He did, and, well, he succeeded better than other people, and Donnie Neitz also succeeded as well. So what happened? Well, when the belt was vacated in February the 28th of 2011, that same day, Raul Garcia, the guy that was actually the Mexican fighter of the, he was a former champion, which we'll talk about that in a moment, won the WBO interim champion in October. And he was given the belt just a few months later, until April the 30th. He fought against Romel Asenjo from the one and only of the Republic of the Philippines, and got a round 3 TKO. The guy was partly a WBO Oriental champion around the time, and it made sense considering his record was 20-3. Not bad, but not good. And the guy would later fight against Juan Francisco Estrada in 2015 for the unified super flyweight titles, or flyweight, but didn't win. He suffered a round 3 TKO again. So, yeah. But unfortunately, guys, Raul Garcia, after he had some success for an IBF belt he had last year ago and others, which we will talk about, unfortunately, his WBO reign would never be better than his IBF, because later in August the 27th, 2011, Moses Fuentes would come out of nowhere in Mexico, and rest in peace to the guy, because he passed away on November 24th, 2022 at the age of 27, where out of nowhere, the guy that came out of boxing, a man that was off a 12-1 record, won by a close split decision. Moses came into the fight and won by a split decision. And technically, he went on to succeed a little bit more by retaining the title in June of 2012 against Julio Cesar Felix, knocking him down twice from body shots in the first round by KO. Then in October against Ivan Calderon in Puerto Rico. And guess what? He won by a round 5 TKO against the former champion. And sadly, after Calderon lost that fight, he never boxed again after that. He retired for good after the Giovanni, and he even won against Felipe Rivas in October last year for the WBO Latino minimum weight, even though the guy's record was 9-10-2 and barely won by split decision. So seeing him fight against this guy and lose that badly, it just goes to show you how boxing can take a toll on your sport. Your prime was gone, and now this is what you were. And yeah, it just goes to show you how tough it is in boxing. But yeah, this title reign was by far surprisingly not bad. Now, in all fairness, Julio Cesar Felix already lost out fights, but he did had a couple interesting wins, but losses by surprising faces at his time. But it didn't stop him from trying to keep on going until he lost, and he retired the next year with 2 more wins, and that was it. So, but Moses Fuentes managed to put out a good run here for the title. And before you know it, he vacated it again just to move up to the flyweight. The 5th boxer to ever vacate the title by moving up to flyweight. And just to let you guys know, if we count the vacancies here, we have a total of 7 vacancies in the span of 89. Of almost a quarter of a century. And it's just about to get worse because now in April the 19th, 2013, after the vacancy, we bring in another fighter. His name was Carlos Buitrago. This time, this fight also took place in the Philippines. Unfortunately, this one did not go well in their first meeting. But to be honest, guys, I think the real fight would have been different because months before November, in July the 13th, after a guy named Mirlito Sabilo had what it takes from the Philippines when he was actually an Oriental champion in the minimum weight, he later defeated Luis de la Rosa for the WBO Interim World Minimum Weight Champion in March. He retains the title by a 9th round KO against Jose Estrada in July. But in November the 30th, Carlos Buitrago, his stardom would come to an end. With a 27-0 record and the fights ending with 115 to 113 by 2 scores, 114 to 114 even is why the fight ending in a split decision draw, this undefeated dude, his boxing career would die because of this fight. And guys, this has to be the biggest downfall in a boxer's career because this guy's later title defenses and title fights he would have in the future, and keep this in mind, it's like, I don't know what to say. It's seeing the guy Carlos have his career come to an end like that was bad. And Merlito Sabrillo, he would take on Francisco Rodriguez Jr. in March, 4 months later after that fight. Unfortunately, Sabrillo was knocked down in the 2nd round, and he was on the canvas again seconds later in the second of it when it seemed that he wrestled on his feet, and the referee waved no knockouts on the occasion. But then 8 or so rounds later, Francisco finished a job in round 10 to win the belt. And that guy's career became big as well because he went on to lose more fights and not achieve nothing else after that again. And he's still boxing when he lost his last fight in May this year by 1st round knockout against someone that's probably a contender. Francisco Rodriguez, well, after August, when he took on Katsunari Takayama, which we've talked about before, they went to Mexico, again, just like Mirlito did. Rodriguez brought him down in round 3, but they kind of went the decision by 12 rounds. And after that, well, the rest was history. Seriously, that was it. That was it for his run in the division of winning a title. Because after that, well, to be honest, he didn't do nothing else. he went up to weight class as well to go up to junior flyweight, aka the light flyweight, but not without succeeding, quite frankly. Because on December the 15th, when Rodriguez intended to move into weight class, the title was vacated around that time. Now, guys, even though this was an interesting story, because, guys, on August the 9th, 2014, just like our Japanese boxer Kazuto Ioki once did in the WBC back in the early day when he both unified the WBA and then he went up the next weight class, which we'll get to that moment, Katsunari was the IBF Minimumweight Champion at that time. So this was for the unified champion. And when Francisco won the belt and retained the titles by unifying them, he decided to move up to weight class. And did he do good in the WBO or the next weight class? Not really. Not really. Not really. In his first years, however, but he did try to make some interesting recoveries at the time and have a full long length of fighting, nobody's, and as of right now, in June, he did had a fight against GLOAT for the WBC interim world flyweight title, which we're now hearing information is now they're going to call it a no contest because now they said that Francisco failed a drug test. So there goes that comeback down the drain, even though BoxRec still has him as titling the credited of the win, but we don't know if GLOAT is going to get his record back, so who knows? So, yeah, that's the downfall of Francisco Rodriguez there. Ridiculous. As for Katsunari Takayama, he went on in Japan to help out his country to win the WBO title against Go Oderi by a round 7 TKO. Unfortunately, he vacated the belt to go up to skip his mandatory challenge in favor to fight the former champion. And to be honest, I really don't know what to say about that. It's kind of ridiculous to hear that. Because not only the WBO belt was on the line that night against Go Oderi when he won that fight, even though the scorecards were 57-57 even, 58-56 by one judge, the IBF belt was also on the line that same night as well. Instead of taking on his mandatory challenger and to keep the belts together, he decided to vacate the WBO to fight for the IBF belt to retain, which he did, and he wouldn't keep the belt for long. But the WBO belt, they'll come back to him, just not for long, because later, the dumbest is about to come. Seriously. It's this one. It just plays off as a ridiculous scene because at this moment it just gets worse. Kosei Tanaka, a guy that's now have retired this year due to his injuries, went on to win his first title to become Jake Paul again. In 4 professional fights, 12-4, 13-6-2, 17-7-2, and 18-0 with his last fight, he fought against 24-1 Julian Yardraz for the WBO title and won the fight. He took on Vic Salador, that would later become champion at the time, and so on in 2015, where he retained the belt after Victor Salador dominated him in the first 5 rounds by all scorecards favoring his opponent. And in round 6, after when Tanaka was knocked down in the 5th round, he knocked down Vic in round 6 and pummeled him by an underdog victory from a come from behind. Yeah, Kosei Tanaka was a great star in boxing for his decade in boxing from 2013 to 2014, but it stinks that his career ended badly soon. He went on to defend that title in June against Rene Patuliano and got a round 6 KO. Went on against Moses Fiorantes in December to win the WBO World Light Flyweight Vacant title by round 5 of TKO. Oh boy, another going up to the ranks again for the light flyweight. Man, no wonder there's not a lot of stars in the minimum weight. Every time people win a champion, they go up the next weight class. Go figure. Guess what? August the 20th, 2016, 4 months after that, when he vacated the title in April the 7th, Katsunari Takayama, after his IBF loss he had some time ago, he fights against Riku Kano to routinely win back the WBO title by a round 6 technical decision. Was it worth it? I guess. Rico had a great 10-1-1 record. It was close. And then he fought against a non-title fight because, unfortunately, he never fought again until 2020 in December, because Takayama retired from professional boxing in order to concentrate on training for the 2020 Olympics, Summer Olympics, and the interim champion against Fukuura when he promoted to full champion, when he was later promoted. Yeah. And that belt got vacated. And that would be the last time vacant belts would be there again. Because, vacant became 8, 9, 10, 11. 11-time champion. And then Tatsuya Fukuhara was the interim champion around that time, because he would later get the belt 9 days later to be promoted to champ at the time. And then sadly, in August the 27th, he fought against Ryuya Yamanaka, and Yamanaka defeated him by points decision, round 12 of decision. Later in March, Ryuya Yamanaka defeated Moses Calaros by cornerman stoppage in round 8, only for Vic Salador to finally win the WBO belt in July when defeating his opponent by 12 rounds in Japan. Victor came out and went back to take on Masatanaka Taniguchi in February in Tokyo in the Korakuen Hall, win 12 rounds of decision there, which is full respect for Vic to do that, only to go to Puerto Rico against Wilfredo Mendez to lose by 12 rounds decision in August 24th. Wilfred Mendez was a decent fighter and had some interesting skills and was undefeated. At that time, he did score out a close fight until 2 months later. He had a round 7 technical decision when he had his opponent got hurt by name Axel Vega and barely retained the title by split decision, and after 7 rounds of technical decision. And then in February, due to the COVID, he retained his title against Gabriel Mendoza, 36-2 fighter, to win by round 9 TKO. Unfortunately, guys, he held on to the belt for a long time until December of 2021, when he went back to Japan to have a match against Masatanaka Taniguchi, the same guy that lost against Vic Salador in February of 2019. And surprisingly, Taniguchi pulled out an amazing victory here and won with round 11 TKO. After that win in Kokugikan, Tokyo, he went to Korakuen Hall in April against a fighter named Kai Ijizawa, and he went to win by knockout in round 11 as well. And at this moment, it seemed like this guy finally found his leverage. And then sadly, Melvin Jerusalem, 19-2 at the time, back in January of 2023, won by a second round TKO. And Taniguchi, well, technically, he would barely not become the same boxer again. Well, kind of, considering he already scored his win early right now, recently, and he's number 6 in the light flyweight division. But at this moment, I think the damage was already done after he lost against Melvin Jerusalem, because Jerusalem would later go on to try to retain his title 4 months later until May the 27th. He fought against Oscar Collazo. And surprisingly, the rounds, after 6 rounds of competition, they came in close. But until the 7th round came, with judges scoring it 67-66 by all 3 judges, giving it to Oscar Collazo by close disparity, the fight ended where it stated that he cannot continue after round 7, and the California rules stated it would have been ruled as a KO. Oscar Collazo's win against Melvin Jerusalem was his biggest win, and considering he was the eliminator back in January against Rudel Reyes, his title defenses in boxing aren't that much to talk about, well, for 2024. After against Garen Diagen in August, when I turned 25 on the 26th, by round 6 of Cornerman retirement, his wins against Reyneris Gutierrez in January by 2nd, 3rd round TKO, and then a 12-round decision against Zapata Gerardo, a 14-1-1 fighter, going 12 rounds of decision. Oscar Collazo was an untouchable foe. And he showed that in November the 16th, when he fought for the inaugural Ring Magazine champion and for the WBA Super Minimumweight Championship bout with the WBO. That fighter was Phamanon Nyamtrung, a.k.a. Knockout CP Freshmart. And he dominated that fight so easily. Freshmart had no business to be in the stage like that. And this was in the main event in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh. By round 7 TKO. Now, of course, in March, he went to Mexico to take on Edwin Cano Hernandez, 13-2-1, and won by round 5 knockout due to a body punch, but that doesn't matter. Now, considering Oscar Collazo's 12-9, and I am thinking to myself that he is going to be, again, another victim for going up to weight class, because at this moment, like, the thing is, guys, we've had not one, but guys, we've had over 7 fighters. 7 out of 11 boxers vacated this belt to go up to the next weight class. Guys, my final prediction about this entire podcast I've been talking about, and it's been over an hour since I recorded this. My final thought is, I find this ironic to understand how all of this information can go to play, because I look back at all the information here, and even with Oscar Collazo as champion, it makes me feel tough to understand. Because, guys, even Jose Antonio Aguirre and Ivan Calderon were the decorated champions back in 2000 to 2003. But then you had some other fighters at the time. Like, when you had fighters that already unified the titles, what else could you do? Nothing. And the problem was, guys, you had these interesting fighters of enough interesting fighters that were in the division that would later become famous in the next weight classes. It's almost like no one cares. And guys, I hope Oscar Collazo gets another shot for something here, because I would like to see another rematch with him and Melvin Jerusalem. They were close after the first fight, so maybe a second fight would be good. Or have Melvin Jerusalem fight against Pedro Tandrin and have them unify their titles, and then we'll give them a chance to fight for Undisputed. It's worth a shot. Like, where's there left to to give. Yet again, guys, I just think it's too much talking for me to talk about this stuff, because after 3 episodes of talking about this, well, unfortunately, we're already coming into the IBF rankings, ladies and gentlemen. So next time, oh boy, the IBF will be on the line, ladies and gentlemen. We have the IBF next time on the Mr. GLOAT podcast. And then the day after tomorrow, on Friday, will be the 98th episode of the GLOAT podcast, which is the WBA. But for now, guys, thanks for watching this, and that's all I have to say. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.